This will be the bull market everyone is waiting for, probably. It's another one huge pillar for adoption. And I think that adoption is just not feasible on Solana. So it's not an infrastructure anymore. It's a business model. The reason why mega brands decide to do rollups on Ethereum, it has less to do with Ethereum and more to do with the fact that Ethereum enables rollups, right? This is the vision of SSV 2.0. It's not about restaking. It's about extending what validators can do in ways that are not currently in their scope.
Welcome back to the Blockster podcast. Today we have Alon, and we'll be talking about restaking, Ethereum validators, and what's happening in Ethereum land overall. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Nice. Let's start with a quick introduction about yourself. I know that you joined the industry in 2013 because a friend of yours or someone that you know was talking about Bitcoin, and then you had some challenges withdrawing or sending money to the country that you're from.
Yeah.
That's how you got into crypto. So tell me a bit more about
It was super random. I was working back in the day in Rome, from all places, in a startup. And there was a guy, we were in like this, I don't know if we have them yet, but it's a kind of an accelerator where basically there's a bunch of startups in one place and like they have some additional funding. So there was like 10 or 12 startups in this one shared space, and this guy from a different startup kind of kept on talking about Bitcoin this and Bitcoin that, and we kind of actually made fun of it because it was very kind of has a strong conviction about it, and like, back in the day nobody knew what it is. And so yeah, we it was kind of funny, and nobody really paid attention, but at some point I kind of started to dig in and kind of really kind of understood the potential there. And being the engineer I am, I kind of started diving into the code of Bitcoin, contributed a bit of code to Bitcoin, and then later on, as Ethereum came along, I dove into that as well. And so, yeah, it was the introduction for me. The introduction to crypto was very, very random.
Tell me a bit more about how the industry has changed over the last 12 years, because when you joined, we had only Bitcoin, and
Right.
now we have all these coins. We're recording on the 17th today, and we're in the crypto week when the US is essentially passing so many legislations, even though some of them
Yeah.
didn't get passed yesterday. But still, we're talking about regulating the industry. We're talking about banks getting involved. We're talking about countries having their own stable coin. Um, Tell me a bit more about the feeling underneath it and how has it evolved.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is how big it is. Back in the day, you knew everyone. Every new thing, everyone knew about. Um, there was this forum kind of looked from the 90s called Bitcoin Talk, I think. Basically, if you did anything worth mentioning, people put it there. So it was like one place, everything happened. And now, obviously, it's so big. I don't think there is one person that can cover the entire industry today in terms of knowledge and experience and just, the know-how. And so it's so big that you start to find yourself specializing in specific areas, rather than kind of, broad stroking the entire industry.
And I'm really interested in knowing, what was the hardest moment for you throughout this journey in crypto? Was there a moment when you were questioning everything, questioning Bitcoin, not on a technological level, because I believe everyone that has read the white paper and has been involved in the industry for long enough believes in the tech, but have you ever questioned the adoption of, like, oh my days, we might not make it, not because the tech is terrible, but because not enough people will believe in it and we won't see this network effect?
Yeah. Never had that. I mean, I was pretty much had a strong conviction from day one. I thought, it might be naive, and I guess if I would have started now at like almost 40 years old, it's maybe the approach would be different. But back in the day, being 20 something, yeah, basically the idea was the world needs to change to whatever we say it needs to change to. Never had that problem, and still don't. I think it is one of the biggest pillars of innovation in humanity's history. It's as big as the different revolutions we saw in technology, finance, and all of that. Um, and so, yeah, I never had that. Of course, there was a lot of challenges in building my project and company and stuff like that. But like on a broader level, no, never.
And before we transition to SSV, tell me a bit about the transition from Bitcoin to Ethereum. I know that you contributed to the Bitcoin code. What made you look into the Ethereum? How come you didn't stay at Bitcoin Maxi and try to build
Yeah,
something on top of the Lightning Network, or try to focus on L2s on Ethereum, even though it
yeah,
was so early, but even like get involved in like Bitcoin Cash and
yeah.
that side of the ecosystem.
So Ethereum was, for people who don't remember, was the OG of ICOs. Basically, it was one of the biggest, definitely back in the day, and it was very different. Most of the other projects, they were basically forks of Bitcoin. Ethereum basically built from the ground up something new. At that point, I don't know if people remember, but at that point, there was this thing called color coins, which was kind of a layer on top of Bitcoin for issuing new tokens. And that was starting to pick up. I was even working in a startup that originally did its ICO on color coins, then transitioned to Bitcoin, to Ethereum eventually. But um, so that was starting to pick up, and then Ethereum did its ICO and started to bring a lot of brain power around it, with a kind of a sense of excitement around this never-ending possibilities of smart contracts and what they can do, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, that was kind of a big milestone everyone paid attention to, both the haters and the people who liked it. And so, yeah, that was definitely a pivotal moment.
Nice. That's really interesting. And I wanna start talking about SSV Network, but before we do that, I kind of wanna take a few steps back and talk about how blockchain works. I know that the main goal of your company is to essentially make the validators more robust and decentralized. But if we take a step back, we know that each blockchain has a settlement execution consensus and a DA layer. And then you have like a monolithic and modular. But regardless of what choice you have these four main components. So, can you just explain how validators fit within the entire blockchain and what's their essential role? And I guess
Right.
it's probably going to be good to talk about block producers as well and how they collaborate with validators.
So, every blockchain. So if you abstract the idea of a blockchain, it's a distributed settlement layer, right? That in its core, it's a settlement layer, in the sense that you can change something in it, and other people agree to that thing, and it's distributed because it's not held or operated by one entity. So for example, a bank is a settlement, or the banking, let's say the banking industry, the settlement layer, but it's centralized, right? It's controlled and regulated. And Ethereum or other blockchains are a distributed version of that. And in order to make this a distributed version of that work, and not every person just having their own idea of what Ethereum is, you have this thing called a consensus layer, which is what the name suggests, a way to come to a consensus on what is exactly Ethereum, or what is the state of Ethereum more particularly. And consensus protocols have evolved around over the years. Today, the prevalent ones are proof of stake, meaning that you lock some capital in, and it gives you the right to be part of this consensus protocol and earn rewards. And there's a bunch of different people called validators that all lock up their capital. In Ethereum's case, is obviously Ethereum, and they get the right to vote as part of this consensus protocol. Now, there's a few roles you do as a validator on Ethereum, but let's say there's two main ones. One is you participate as a voting actor. Basically, you vote on what you think Ethereum state is. And two, which is much less frequent, is you actually get to propose a block. You basically get a chance to say what you think the next chapter or the next block of Ethereum should be, and then people vote on if they agree or not agree. And so that's kind of the relationship between validators and the users of Ethereum. And if you think about it, Ethereum is essentially this point of consensus between its validators. There is no Ethereum outside of this, right? So whatever the validators agree on, it is Ethereum at that point. That's why it's so important. And we at SSV, what we do, we see ourselves as building foundational infrastructure for making Ethereum better in a bunch of different ways. We started with something called DVT, distributed validators, which is the idea that we wanted to make the validator layer of Ethereum, or the validator infrastructure for Ethereum, much more decentralized and distributed than it is today, using this technology. And we're evolving now to do more things around rollups and scale of Ethereum. Again, with the idea of this being this foundational components of Ethereum.
Okay, and before we go to the rollups part, can you just tell me a bit more about the DVT side
Yeah,
and the solo staking? I know that Ethereum, especially Vitalik, was talking a lot about solo validators and how important they are, but then with the 32 ETH, it was very challenging for them. And then DVT came up as this revolutionary idea where you could essentially partner with your friends and have multiple people running one of the validators.
yeah.
Can you just tell me a bit more about the benefits of it and the drawbacks and what's happening? Are people still embracing it?
Yeah. So DVT stands for Distributed Validators technology. And basically the idea there, it actually started as a research project by the Ethereum Foundation, where the idea was to take an Ethereum validator and split it up into independent operators. And those operators together can collaborate and work this validator. Now, if you do that at scale, you make a much more robust infrastructure for the kind of the greater Ethereum staking world. And it also opens up the door for collaboration, because if you have different entities running those validators and none of the entities are actually controlling alone the validator, they need to work together. It opens up the door to introduce much more different players or actors within this ecosystem, solo stakers, smaller stakers, and so on and so forth. And so this is kind of a foundational component for staking, but it also unlocks a different way to do and operate your validator. And so the classic way, for example, is to, instead of having one entity running a 32 ETH validator, you can now have 4, 7, 10, even 13 entities running the same validator. So you can still maintain this kind of sovereignty of running your own validator, but with a much less reduced capital requirement. You also can use that for much bigger institutional stakers, where they can distribute whoever runs their stake across different data centers, across different entities. They can even introduce solo stakers into their ecosystem in some ways, like Lido is doing. And so it opens up a lot of doors, because it's kind of a programmatic way for running infrastructural validators for Ethereum. And yeah, it's being adopted in a very, very big way. We've launched our network to mainnet at the beginning of 2024. We scaled up quite significantly today. On SSV, you have 125,000 active validators. That's close to 12% of all ETH staked. That's basically more than 1 every out of 10 validators is an SSV run validator. So it's 4 million ETH. It's very much at scale, and it's only been 18 months since we launched to mainnet. So I would say that the greater Ethereum community definitely adopted it in with open arms, and I think this is a superior way to secure Ethereum than having siloed, centralized entities doing that.
And you mentioned the numbers, which are quite impressive, and you're essentially second on rated now,
Yep.
right behind Lido. And I'm really interested on what exactly do you contribute this success to? I believe there were other projects trying to do something similar to
Right.
what you guys are doing, but they couldn't really nail it. Why do you think the SSV managed to, I guess, do it at the right time, but also provide the right technology?
Right. So I think it's a combination of two things. One is we just were super focused on making it a better version of what staking is. So we have better performance, better decentralization. Overall, the infrastructure and the technologies is a step into the future. And two, we also introduced incentives to actually migrate your validators into SSV, and that works really, really well. The incentives in of themselves are not that big, but they're enough to actually pull a lot of people to transition to SSV, and we saw that in a major way. Yeah, that were the two contributing factors to it.
And you outlined the benefits of having a DVT, but I'm still struggling to wrap my head around the drawbacks. Would you be able to outline some of
Yeah.
those?
So initially, the drawbacks were really technical complexity. I mean, obviously, you're introducing something additional to your stack, but as things progressed, we actually iron out a lot of those issues. And today, the main challenge is because we're getting big, is a centralized point of failure. Basically, everyone is using one client, which is SSV. And so we've been 6 months ago, we started working on a second client with Sigma Prime, which are the guys behind Lighthouse, one of the best, or if not the best, beacon chain clients out there. And they are now in public testing of their second client of SSV. So, there are challenges along the way, but we're trying to kind of predict what they are and try to come up with good solutions.
And can you just double down on the role of each client and what's their role within the Ethereum ecosystem?
So basically, our client and the Sigma Prime client are exactly the same. We just have two different implementations of it. So we imagine that there's some kind of a bug in one client, you'll pick it up very quickly with the other client. So you just have this cross reference of two different teams working on the same thing, which is really at the heart of how Ethereum functions. It's not by accident Ethereum has a bunch of different clients to both its execution and consensus clients. It's very important to have that for resilience and consistency and robustness of the protocol.
And earlier on, you mentioned that you've transitioned to L2s, and that's what you spoke about at ETC. Can you just tell me a bit more about your like overall take on the
Yeah.
L2 space?
Um, I think so there's two main things happening on the infrastructural level of Ethereum. On the one hand, it's staking, how you secure Ethereum. And on the other hand, you have rollups, which is how you scale Ethereum, right? Up until now, those two things were separated. Um, Obviously, rollups became very popular. We saw huge brands coming in and running their own rollup. And I think it's great. The problem is that I think they're not as aligned as they should be with the goals of Ethereum, meaning that they create fragmentation, they take a lot of value out of Ethereum, and ultimately, if you look at rollups by Coinbase and Robinhood, again, they are amazing, and I think they help a lot with growing Ethereum. But we shouldn't confuse them with Ethereum. Coinbase is a for-profit company building a product which happens to be a rollup. It's not Ethereum. It doesn't have Ethereum's best interest in mind. It has Coinbase's best interest in mind, as they should. And I think that kind of at this point is becoming very obvious to me. And I think that with the development of validators and what we've been doing and the development of rollups, I think there is a new category of rollups which will form in the future, which is based on Ethereum validators for alignment and security, and also presents something called synchronous composability, which is the idea that rollups can really compose with one another in a seamless way, to create a seamless user experience. And both of those things, I think, will be powered by Ethereum validators and will present a really interesting new category of rollups, um, different from the rollups we're seeing today, which currently the main rollups we're seeing today are, mega brands spinning up their own rollups. I think what we'll see in this other category of rollups is many smaller projects, even though they can still be very big, actually spinning up their own rollup, but working together as a network, of a composable network of rollups to present a different flavor of rollups. It's kind of like, I think, the difference between centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges. They're still both exchanges, very different approaches to actually being an exchange, right? Centralized exchanges are centralized. They are very big, very scalable, but they are centralized. They're not. They don't play nice with other exchanges. Decentralized exchanges, on the other hand, are part of Ethereum, and at their kind of core are composable with other DeFi protocols. And I think you'll see the same with rollups.
Okay, let me repeat this because I kind of missed the what elements will be on Ethereum and what will be the benefit of having this new form of rollups. Um, I try to note down execution and validation, which is like settlement on Ethereum, and then I assume like you can have DA on like Celestia or Avail, and then I guess consensus would need to be on Ethereum? Like, sorry, I couldn't fully understand
So
what
let me
the benefit.
break it down. So rollups have three main components to them, right? Who creates the blocks, where you settle, um, um, where you settle both in terms of the DA and the settlement layer.
Yeah.
And three is, how do they interact with other rollups? Those are the three components you have. So current rollups are settling on Ethereum. Most of them are also using Ethereum as DA.
Yeah.
They are centrally sequenced and they are pretty much isolated. So they play in their own ecosystem. I mean, there are some, interactions without rollups, but for the most part, the Coinbase rollup is very different and separated than the Robinhood rollup and the World Chain rollup, etc. A new category of rollups is forming, which changes things. One, the sequencing is not necessarily centralized anymore. You can have decentralized sequencing, which
Okay.
makes it much more robust, censorship resistant, and also very much more aligned to Ethereum. And two, those rollups are inherently composable with other rollups, meaning they connect with other rollups from the get-go, which forms this network of rollups. So it's very different than the current category of rollups. This will unlock, I think, a new wave of rollups coming in, basically enabling any DApp, any decentralized app, which is big enough to become its own rollup, to actually get fees from users by building blocks, customizing their product, customizing the experience, make it cheaper, making it scalable, introducing new features, stuff like that. Um, but in a way that is composable with other rollups, because that's it, the basis of what blockchain is.
Okay. Okay. I think I understand. Um, but kind of wonder how do you view the current ecosystems that we already have, like Optimism, that's doing something similar. So people building on the OP stack and they want to create interoperability. There's been like a massive topic within the L2s. Arbitrum is doing something similar. They're trying to incentivize people. Polygon has been talking a lot about interoperability and how they will enable people building within their ecosystem to have L2s that are interoperable. How is this different than what you've described?
I think it's all about incentives. The current rollup landscape doesn't have any incentives to be composable and play along with one another. If you take Coinbase, World Chain, Unichain,
Mm.
Robinhood Chain, all of that, they have actually disincentives to play with others because they're competitors. And so it's kind of like the centralized exchanges, right? Binance is competing with Coinbase. They don't want to play along with one another. They want to eliminate one another. This is very different than DeFi protocols because DeFi protocols inherently are composable. They play together in order to make value. And so I think that it's not about the technology, it's about the incentives. There is no incentives for the current landscape of rollups to become friendly with one another and create this network effect. We want to create this new category of rollups with from the ground up are composable, and that's their strength. And the reason why is that those rollups are not don't have the brand name to become their own ecosystem like Coinbase, but nonetheless they are very important to Ethereum. They are Ethereum in fact. So if you look at the DeFi protocols today, they are Ethereum because if Ethereum tomorrow dies, those DeFi protocols die with it. If Ethereum dies tomorrow, Coinbase doesn't die tomorrow, right? So the incentive alignment here is completely different. And so we want to facilitate this other category. We want to facilitate rollups which are Ethereum aligned, composable with one another, and have the network effect and a seamless user experience across all of those rollups.
And when you say you want to facilitate them, you want to enable developers to build on top of SSV. And
So you'll have to wait for DevConnect for that.
okay, so you wouldn't be able to reveal any information.
Not yet, not yet. Yeah.
Okay, okay, that's interesting. Okay, so when you were talking about it, I'm really interested in value accrual because one of the problems that Ethereum had with older L2s is that they're cannibalistic and that they're essentially taking away from Ethereum because you have a lot of projects building on top of Base and the rest of the L2s that you mentioned, but value and money is not going back to the L1. And even though L1 developed block space and made it so much cheaper for L2s to enable this projects to build unique dApps on top of them, value didn't really go back to Ethereum. So I would have the same question for you. Like, how are you hoping to resolve that? Because if you don't resolve in some way and don't have an explanation on why and how value will accrue to the L1, then I don't think that they'll be very welcoming of having another L2.
Right. So again, it's all back to incentives. If you are Coinbase, you want to use Ethereum for its settlement layer, right? And you want to pay as little as you can. I think that if you look at Ethereum, what it offers rollups today, it basically offers two things. It offers settlement and it offers data availability. I think Ethereum, and by the way Ethereum offers those two things, it's through its validators, right? Because ultimately the validators are the one doing settlement and actually storing data for data availability. If I think that Ethereum validators can offer another service to rollups, which will revolutionize how rollups work. That service is sequencing. Um, Validators on Ethereum can actually offer sequencing or block building services to rollups. And by doing that, those rollups unlock composability between them, which is a huge value for them, and in return pay fees to those validators. And so by offering another type of service, this service also actually the one creating this new category of rollups, and in return, those rollups pay fees to Ethereum. And so it's always down to the incentive and the technology. We want to enable validators to do more things in the rollup world. By doing that, we open up the door for this new category of rollups, which are composable and play together. And in return, they pay fees to the validators themselves for enabling that to them. And so we align the incentives from the rollups to Ethereum, and also align the fees collected by the validators. And so it all happens with the same purpose or the same promise, right? Versus existing rollups which are very different and don't use that type of service at all. And so it's when I say alignment, it's not just alignment in the way you build a rollup. It's also alignment in the way that you interact with the actual entities that secure Ethereum. And so I think that by offering an additional service, they can generate additional rewards and create this new category of rollups. And I think that's a win-win to everyone. And again, that's why it's a different category of rollups, because they work differently, right?
That's really interesting. Are you concerned that Justin, Drake, and Vitalik have been talking a lot about turning Ethereum into a base rollup? And they're essentially saying that they want to make it so cheap to settle and like have execution on the L1 that at some point you won't necessarily need L2s. And I know that the original roadmap was to use Ethereum for settlement and DA, but it seems like that this strategy has shifted over the last, I would say, 5 months, even longer. Um, because everyone was criticizing Ethereum of like, what the hell are you doing? It seems like the L2 strategy was a mistake. So they have slightly pivoted from it and they've changed the way they talk about L2s now. And they've
I I
changed
th-
the
I, th-
way
I, th-
they
I
talk
I think
about
we shouldn't
L1.
confuse. I think we shouldn't confuse the push to increase gas capacity for Ethereum with how eventually blockchains can scale.
Mm,
You can't really scale in a vertical way. You need to scale horizontally. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to do that.
mm,
A lot of the suggestions from Justin and Vitalik and others are things are along the lines of native rollups and
mm,
stuff like that, which actually contributes to the rollup centric roadmap, meaning that you can facilitate another type of service by Ethereum validators, which is creating validity proofs for rollups, right? So you can see the trend here. Currently, Ethereum offers settlement and DA for rollups. I'm talking in the next 2 years to offer also sequencing or block building services for rollups. And Vitalik and Justin are talking, 3 to 5 years away to also offer validity services for rollups. So I think it's all aligning in the same direction. Um, Hopefully, what will happen is that rollups will become so composable with one another and Ethereum that it's gonna all become just one big network. There's not gonna be a distinction between a rollup, transacting on a rollup and you're transacting on Ethereum. It's simply a big mesh, and it's seamless to the user. And so I don't think it's contradictory. I think it's very much aligned in the same spirit. I think Ethereum should increase the block gas limits years ago, and now we're finally doing that. That's not to say that, again, the original thesis behind rollups is very simple. You cannot scale vertically. You need to scale horizontally. And so unless you find a way to do that, I mean, originally the idea was to do it with shards, but that proved to be very difficult. Maybe in the future you'll have shards in the way rollups work today, kind of, you know, tightly integrated into one big mesh. But it's still very much a rollup or horizontal scaling solution.
Nice. I sincerely enjoyed this slightly technical conversation, but I want to take a few steps back and talk about practical implementation of dApps and what are the benefits of having this new L2s and the dApps that will be built on top of them rather than building dApps on top of the existing L2s.
Right. There are two current DApp developers have two options. They can either just stay on Ethereum and inherently have higher expenses for their users. Some dApps can accept that. Maybe that's not too bad for them, but some dApps can't. And so their other option is to use rollups. And there, what you see is them deploying on multiple rollups. Now, that's a really, really bad thing for dApps because it means that they fragment their user base, fragment their liquidity, and fragment their operational layer of the business. And that's really bad. It's with every single new instance of a rollup, you create more complexity as a business. And that's bad. This new category of rollups will introduce a third option, which is just extend your DApp into one network of rollups. And because it's synchronous composable with one another, the UX is like you never left Ethereum. And so you only need to really deploy one instance of your DApp into that network of rollups. And everyone on this network from all of the different rollups can enjoy your DApp, something you cannot really do with existing rollups. And I think that's a much more viable option for DApp developers, because that means that they don't need to fragment their user base and liquidity and operations. And I think that's a real innovation for them. They don't compromise on the UX and but they are able to scale up and offer cheaper transactions for their users.
And could you name a few dApps or just explain what they could do and why they will be better on
Yeah.
the new L2s, but also why would they be better than using mainstream technology?
Right. So imagine that you have some kind of a DEX you develop, right? And today, if you want to expand your DEX into L2s, you need to basically recreate your DEX on every L2 you want to be part of. That basically means different liquidity, different user base, because your users need to move into that chain to interact with your DEX, right? So it's kind of like a completely new um, project, right? Also, there's a secondary effect on that if you move your DApp into the Coinbase chain, um, your users become first and foremost Coinbase users that happen to use your DApp on the Coinbase chain, um, versus them being Ethereum users that use your chain. And so you're actually giving users to Coinbase, and there's nothing preventing Coinbase from being predatory against your DApp and just building their own flavor of it. We saw that, by the way, with there was a revolution in consumer goods, especially with produce and just regular kind of where you buy your food, the marketplace and stuff like that, where a lot of the big chains created this generic brand. I don't know if you're familiar with this. So they basically saw what's successful on their shelves and recreated a generic brand that has exactly the same properties as the other brands. And so what happened was that the other brands were initially very excited about having their products on their shelves, but ultimately they lost revenue because they just recreated what they did because it's just a commodity, and everyone just bought or a lot of people are buying the generic version of that. I think this will happen on the Coinbase or the Robinhood chains as well. Whatever is going to be successful in them, they will simply recreate because they are the ones controlling the user. So that's the option they have today. Versus if you're a DEX, for example, you can deploy your DEX into a network of, let's say, 100 or 200 rollups, and you only need to deploy it to one of those rollups because they're composed with one another. Any user on any other rollup can interact seamlessly with your DEX, even if they are not on the same rollup. And because it's a network of rollups, first of all, you can launch your own rollup as a DApp, right? Because it's seamless, so you can run your own rollup and control your own users. But then it's not branded as a Coinbase or Robinhood rollup, and so the chances are that somebody will be predatory are the same chances as somebody will being predatory on Ethereum, which is just a way of competition. So that's the big difference. I think this is much more aligned to DApp developers than actually going to Coinbase. Because when you move to Coinbase, you're giving Coinbase users in return to traffic, right? But ultimately, you're giving every single DApp is by definition giving more to Coinbase as a collective than Coinbase gives them as a DApp. And I think what you'll see is that those rollups are becoming very predatory versus the dApps that are successful on them. And by the way, I think I don't know for sure, but I think that's one of the reasons that Uniswap decided to create the Unichain, even though Uniswap is probably one of the most successful dApps on the Coinbase chain.
So my understanding is that you're hoping to launch the infrastructure that enables developers to deploy their rollups rather than focusing on building your own rollup that will enable
Exactly.
dApps to like developers to build on top of you.
The name of the game is not SSV rollup. The name of the game is a network of rollups. That's a different game than what people are playing right now.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it. Sounds interesting. I want to talk a bit more about the SSV 2.0 and how you essentially enable validators to extend their functionality and
Yeah.
security to other applications. It's a fancy way to say literally restaking, and there is a lot of that. That's
So
why.
yes and no, because I think that if we go back to what I've described, right, the essential services that Ethereum does, or essentially the Ethereum validators do, right? So currently they offer data availability and settlement. I said that in the near future they will also offer building blocks for rollups or sequencing for rollups. And then in the short to medium term, they will also offer validity for rollups, right? So what you can see is basically validators doing more, right? They're extending their responsibilities in return to earning extra rewards. This is the vision of SSV 2.0. It's not about restaking. It's about extending what validators can do in ways that are not currently in their scope. Extending what they can do for more rewards. Because I believe that the validator set of Ethereum is the greatest validator set, distributed validator set and coordination layer that anyone ever built. And this coordination layer can do more things than what it does today. And that's the essential ingredient in based applications. The reason why they're called based applications is because it's the type of application or service that is based on Ethereum validators. And so if you frame it like that way, you start to see the difference between that and restaking. Restaking is just taking capital, locking it, and then doing something. Here, we're actually talking about the infrastructural component of Ethereum doing more things for Ethereum itself. So it's a very different approach and very different use of the resources for different directions.
I think the goal is the same, even though the way that you're gonna achieve it is slightly different
I
because
think it's
you
on a different
enable.
category. So you'll see different things built on risk taking and different things built on base steps.
Yeah.
For example, you'll see base rollups are built on SSV, right? Because SSV has validators and base rollups want to use validators. I don't think you'll see a lot of the type of applications you're seeing on EigenLayer built on SSV right now because of it's a different infrastructure, right? Uh, their infrastructure is capital driven and it focuses on a bunch of different things like AI and whatever they focus on. Our infrastructure is Ethereum driven and validators driven. So whatever the validator can do and can do best, that's what you'll see on SSV. So I think you'll see a very different types of development happening there.
Okay. And I feel like I understand now. It's more of a on the eigenlayer. It's more of a mercenary capital they will deploy for
Yeah,
security, and on SSV, it's more of a what validators can do more to
exactly.
essentially incentivize people that are validators to provide additional service.
Exactly.
And it's not just the restaking component. There are more to it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, I have a an interesting question then. It's I haven't done enough research on that topic, but I know that it was widely discussed on Twitter, the role of validators. And I know that some people were arguing the side of not giving us many functions to the validators, because if we want to have, I don't know whether it's decentralization, but I feel like there was a problem with having a lot of functionality to the validators. Um, and they were arguing that essentially we need to have block producers, validators as like two separate entities that have different objectives rather than one person doing the two things. And now you're wanting to essentially put more functionality to the validators. Again, like the same question, what are the drawbacks? And I guess what are the positive sides of it?
I think it's always a trade-off, right? I mean, you need to trade off the thing you're building and understand if the regular person running a validator can actually do that, or they need to delegate to some centralized entity, right? So, um, in block building on Ethereum, we definitely see the case where most of the block building is delegated to third-party block producers. I don't think it's a major problem because it's not inherent in the protocol. It's rather on the edge, right? So if one of those block builders become malicious, it's very easy to quickly change to another block builder. And so it does have drawbacks, but those drawbacks are not as deep as if centralization was ingrained within the protocol itself, like Solana, for example, where the protocol itself is the one driving centralization because of capital efficiency and the way they elect different people to do validation. Um, and so the same thing goes here. I think it's always a trade-off between what the economics of validation and the healthiness of the validator set versus what they do. And I think it's not, I mean, you can always find a middle ground. And so in that sense, I think that we are aware of that. And again, because we're building something which is foundational to Ethereum, and it's this how we see it, we always have this trade-off in our heads.
Talking about Solana, just what's your take on Solana and monolithic blockchains in general? Do you think that they will face a massive challenge down the road, or
Oh, they're already facing massive challenges. I think that it's so they're facing challenges in different ways than people think. So, for example, we look at rollups as a way to scale Ethereum, but it's not really just a way to scale Ethereum. It's a business model. The reason why mega brands decide to do rollups on Ethereum, it has less to do with Ethereum and more to do with the fact that Ethereum enables rollups, right? Um, and so that's a side effect of technical decisions made 5 or 6 years ago. I think that's where Solana will find its difficult. So on the one hand, you can be very scalable if you compromise on centralization, decentralization, and stuff like that, and you can maybe improve the user experience of that aspect, but you lose a lot of the things that Ethereum is focused on. And so I think that there are commonalities in the offering Solana and Ethereum offer together, but there are definitely different things that they are offering. Solana does not offer rollups. And I think that rollups are emerging to be a huge business model for scaling into the world of TradFi. And I think it's as big as ICOs actually. I think that and tokenization. I think it's another one huge pillar for adoption. And I think that adoption is just not feasible on Solana. So actually the technical decisions, even if not intended to, created this new capability that others simply don't have.
and can you tell me a bit more about your business model and how SSV Network makes money?
Yeah. So every validator on SSV pays a fee. And at scale, that fee is actually scaling quite rapidly. So today, I think yearly, there's around 400,000 SSV paid yearly by validators just for a network fee. Realistically, it's much more because each validator needs to hold more ETH than the actual sum of the fees they pay because of collateral and stuff like that. And so that's a big chunk of change that the SSV network earns as fees. And so that's, yeah, that's and now where we're going into rollups and stuff like that, that will increase quite significantly. And so that's really the heart of it. So basically, you have a network that enables something, people pay fees for that, and goes from there.
And can you also um, tell me more about the validators and more of like how do you incentivize them to come on SSV? And if I already have the 32 ETH and I can essentially become a solo validator at home, what are the benefits of doing it on
Right.
SSV? A, and then B, how does it compare with other DVT providers out there?
Yeah. So every validator run on SSV gets an additional SSV tokens in rewards by running that validator on SSV. That depends on the amount of validators, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a nice addition to the amount of ETH that you earn as a validator. And I think that we've managed to attract anything from solo stakers to liquid staking pools, liquid restaking pools, all the way to the big exchanges to use SSV because of that. And so that works really well. And I think that for the soul staker, other than just extra rewards, it also offers really good performance. Our validators are top notch and regularly rated at the top charts of rated and others. And so those are the incentives. So you can plug into SSV as a solo staker. You can use it in different programs, like for example, the Lido CSM and the Lido Simple DBT programs, where you actually can earn much more because you don't need the 32 ETH. You can run a validator in the behalf of Lido and Ethereum, for example, as well. So there's a growing ecosystem around it, and I think it's SSV is kind of in the midst of it. And then obviously going forward, you can use your validator to also do other things with rollups and earn extra rewards there. So it's kind of like this marketplace of opportunities.
I want to spend the rest of the interview talking about the practical advice that you can give to people that want to become validators on SSV. So let's start from people that have been in the industry for around 5 years, have a bit of knowledge about it, but they're not developers. They don't have the technical knowledge per se. They have some ETH, let's say 10 ETH, 10 and between 10 and 15 ETH. Um, what would you advise this type of people? What would be the first step that they would need to take to become a validator? But also, why is it important to become a validator?
Right. So the importance of, of being a validator is to one, earn extra rewards for your ETH, but also contributing back to Ethereum and making it more decentralized. The more solo stakers we have, the more eyes we have on the Ethereum state and the correctness of the Ethereum state. I think that if you have 10, 12 ETH, definitely check out the different solo staking programs by Ethereum, Rocket Pool, and Lido, because that enables you to run a full validator on SSV without needing the full capital to run the validator. And that actually creates much bigger returns per capital. And so definitely check it out. It does require some technical knowledge, but I think it's very much doable if you have a bit of it.
And what would you advise people that have close to like the 32 ETH, like let's say 27 to 35?
Right. Again, I think it depends on your appetite. I mean, for the most part, people probably will just prefer to put it into some kind of a service. But if you do have the appetite and the technical chops, definitely run your own validator. You'll earn extra rewards, bigger rewards, and you get to contributing back to Ethereum.
Okay.
But make sure you know and read a lot to not make any mistakes.
So what would you advise them to read? Well, what would be the starting point?
Oh,
You
there's so much. I mean, go first of all, go to the SSV docs and read a bunch of a bunch of it there. But there's been so much written all the past 5 years since staking was introduced to Ethereum. I think there's there's more than enough. ChatGPT. I mean, there's a lot of information out there. Just make sure you kind of catch up and understand before you kind of dive in and put your ETH at stake.
And can you tell me a bit more about your plans for Q4 and then 2026? What are you hoping to achieve as a company?
I think you'll have to wait for DevConnect for that.
Definitely, I love that. Wait for Dev Connect. Okay,
Yeah.
let me.
And we can have an interview back there if you're attending. We'll love to kind of chat about there.
I'm not going this year, no. But we should definitely have one after
Yeah.
you present there. Tell me a bit more about Ethereum then. What do you think will happen? And I'm not interested in the price of Ethereum because I don't think it's a good indicator of the ecosystem and what's happening there. But what do you think will happen on technical level by the end of this year? Uh, especially like I'm really interested because now we have Thomas as the head of the foundation, and he's obviously one of the best developers in the industry, and a lot of people blamed the Ethereum Foundation for A, focusing too much on research, and B, setting unrealistic deadlines. Do you think that this will continue over the next year or two, or do you think they'll be able to meet the deadlines that they set for themselves?
I I definitely hope we'll see an improvement of that. I think Ethereum Foundation is to focus more on business and engineering than just research. I think that what we'll see up until the end of the year is probably an increase in the block sizes and potentially even the blob sizes for Ethereum. And I think that's important. And in the future, I think we'll see more and more of focus on ZK in Ethereum, which is very exciting. I think that will really introduce a lot of benefits. I think that the Ethereum Foundation, through the different arms it has, needs to focus more on use cases and developers and facilitate and enable them and promote them more than they do today. I think that's, by the way, one of the things that the Solana Foundation does really, really well, and we should learn from it.
Okay. And what would you describe as success for Ethereum in the next 6 months and then the next 1 year?
I think if we can take the roll-up business model and make it a pillar in what Ethereum is alongside tokenization and DeFi, I think that will be a huge unlock of value, a huge unlock. I think this should be, I mean, if today you see there's really two main pillars on the amount of use cases Ethereum has: tokenization on the one hand, which includes stable coins and stuff like that, and DeFi, which is kind of the use of those tokens within different protocols. I think uh, rollups can be the next pillar, and I think it also could be the next frontier in growth for Ethereum. So I think that if we can make it happen, um, this will be huge. I think this will be the bull market everyone is waiting for, probably.
Nice. And you mentioned two very interesting narratives like tokenization, DeFi, and I think gambling is another one that we've seen, especially on top of Solana. What do you think will be the next practical narrative that could potentially emerge, especially on top of Ethereum? I agree that rollups are something interesting, but I think it's more of an infrastructure. I'm really interested in
So
the
that's where you're mistaken. It's not
yeah.
infrastructure. It's a business model. The reason why Robinhood and OpenAI built a rollup is not because of infrastructure. It's because it's a business model for their business. It embodies what they want to do, and the best way to do that is through a rollup. So it's not an infrastructure anymore. It's a business model. It's like saying tokenization is code. No, it's not. Tokenization is a business model for crypto. Rollups are a business model for crypto. We are unlocking a business model, not an infrastructural component. Um, I'll give an example. Let's imagine there's a few banks that want to go into crypto, but they want to go all in, right? They want to be as big into crypto as they can. Doing a rollup is the best thing they can do, because they can build rollups which serve as their extension of the bank into the crypto world. They can control KYC there and AML. They can control who and what can interact with their accounts. They can use it as infrastructure, but it's actually a business model for banks to become banks on Web3. And so you should look at it that way and not as infrastructure. That's why I think it's going to be this pillar alongside tokenization and DeFi, because it's not about technology anymore. The technology is there, it's evolving, it's maturing. It's about people finding ways to use it in a very different way than they used to do before. And we saw that previously with DeFi and tokenization. Now we're seeing it with rollups.
And can you just double down on how the rollup business model is different than DeFi in combination with the L1?
Yeah,
Because
because when you launch a rollup, you can control a mini version of Ethereum in your own ecosystem. Think how powerful it is. You control a mini version of Ethereum in your company. That means that users coming in are your users. That means that developers coming in are your developers. So when you build a DeFi protocol, you own that contract, right? There is an address on Ethereum, you own that address. When you build a rollup, you own an ecosystem of addresses. And whoever builds things on those addresses or deposits assets into those addresses are your users. That's how powerful it is. If you're a bank and you create an ecosystem of other banking solutions around your rollup, all of that is on your infrastructure. It's not on somebody else's infrastructure. That's why it's so powerful, because you are the decision maker. It's your IP, right? Um, it's like, think of rollups as franchises, right? You have McDonald's, right? But the power of McDonald's is not opening up a restaurant. The power of McDonald's is that you enable everyone to open up a restaurant. That's what rollups are. You can enable anyone to run their own Ethereum. It's blockchain franchise basically. That's a whole business model. It's not a technology anymore. It's a business model. And every rollup is Ethereum first, and then the company or project that spun off their rollup. And so that's why it's so powerful.
I really like that perspective because we normally think of DeFi and rollups from the side of the user, and how, as a user, you have the freedom, the decentralization, and all those things. And they're still there. But I have never view it from the side of the rollup, and how you're essentially building your own ecosystem that is essentially a small business, like a small business or a business model, as you refer to it, and how it could potentially be beneficial to you, which is interesting. I agree with it. I agree that we'll see a lot more rollups emerging, and more businesses will potentially start spinning off their own rollups. Nice. I really enjoyed that conversation. A
Thank you
final
for having
remark
me.
on your side. Is there anything that you want to
I
say?
think we've covered a lot of ground here. I'm super excited about the future of Ethereum. I think it's a very interesting one.
Thanks. Thanks for joining us and sharing your experience and knowledge. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much.